We bring in now Dr. Larry Arnn of Hillsdale College. And speaking of ways to get your message out, Hillsdale has been phenomenal at getting the message out about everything that they are doing. And I had the good fortune to get to sit next to Dr. Larry Arnn at a Seattle, Washington area Hillsdale College event. And I read over the weekend a great weekend interview with you, Dr. Arnn, given all the controversy surrounding Harvard and federal funding of universities and colleges out there. You had a really good argument. I want to let you make it for our audience. The reason Hillsdale doesn't take federal dollars is to be completely independent. Harvard has $53 billion in the endowment. Why can't Harvard just say, hey, we don't need any of this federal government money. We want to instruct in the best way that Harvard feels possible. That seems like a pretty good case to me, and you guys have done it at Hillsdale.
Yeah, thank you very much. You're a sports guy, and I really enjoyed talking to you that night, and enjoyed your speech very much. So we live in what we think of as a liberal society. That means free. That means a lot of things have to go on in the society so that it can control the government. And if the government in detail manages education, including higher education, then the society loses its independence. And, Harvard, which gets a lot of money from the government, billions, they are living under hundreds of pages of detailed rules, and they'd probably be better off without them. But now they've met some rules they don't like don't let the students scream dirty Jew at each other, and they are rebelling about that. And that's, they're in an interesting spot, aren't they?
They're not the only ones either, Dr. Arnn. I appreciate you being with us. There are a number of schools, Columbia University. I could rattle off a few more if I thought about it, but some pretty big name educational institutions out there that have gotten on the wrong side of the Trump administration and therefore the federal government on some of these issues. Do you think that their plan is to just try to batten down the hatches and ride it out and keep doing what they've been doing? Because in the case of admissions, for example, Supreme Court has been quite clear that some of these institutions have been engaged in unconstitutional discrimination in their educational admissions practices, and yet the understanding seems to be that they're just going to keep doing it and get federal dollars.
Yeah, there's something really bad about that. First of all, the institutions we're talking about are some of the greatest universities in the world. Harvard is the oldest in our country, and it has been a treasure for a very long time, and it's still a very elite place. But they got wedded to the idea that what color you are is some vital characteristic in your qualification to be a student. And that's just wrong. It's bad philosophy. It undercuts the whole understanding of the academic task, and as you point out, it's unconstitutional in a nation devoted to all men are created equal. So there's, they are stubborn about it. It's deeply ingrained. It was amazing to me a year ago in the spring that they were having these demonstrations in favor of Hamas and, river to the sea, and they were oppressing Jewish kids. Abusing them and spitting on them, and some of them were assaulted physically, and they were certainly terrorized. And they couldn't stop it. And at Columbia, they suspended class. At Harvard, there were major disruptions. And I thought, at some point, these places are run by people who are in broad agreement with each other. At some point, you'd think they'd say, this is embarrassing. We should go back to class. That's what we're here to do. And they couldn't do it. And that's just, sad. It made me sad, also surprised. They've got some problems. Now they are addressing those problems, they say, and I sometimes doubt their capacity to do that. And the Trump administration is demanding certain monitoring of them, and that's what they're kicking about and rebelling. And Harvard has sued the government, and it's going to be a big legal fight. And but think of the outcome. If they win, it would mean that they're entitled to the money. You can't stop it on the ground that they are discriminating and oppressing people because of their race and religion. And, and the government may not monitor that. at the beginning of the show, you said what I think is the actual solution. We need to decentralize very many things in America. There's way too many rules coming from the top and making a uniform administrative system all over every kind of industry, all over the place. And colleges should be funded in a wide diversity of ways. There's like really rich people in America, and a lot of them give money to Harvard, and a lot of them don't. Well, the thing is, those rich people disagree with each other, and so if it's the government, it's a uniform rule for everybody, and you have to have that some, but you don't have to have that so comprehensively, and especially affecting something sensitive like education, which is where what college is actually for is for young people to go and grow into excellent human beings in intellect and character. And the definition of that is human. And that means Jews and Arabs should both aim for that. And the institutions of higher education should have practices and standards so that everybody pursues that and does it together. The word college means partnership. So they've lost their way, in my opinion, and I hope they find it, but they're fighting very hard not to do it.
Dr. Larry Arnn with us right now of Hillsdale College, fabulous school. You got kids out there, not a bad place to consider applying. I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee right now, Dr. Arnn. Basically, I can see the University of Tennessee campus nearly from where I'm broadcasting. I'm curious how you would analyze this in your career as an educator. It used to be that people looked down on big state schools in the South. Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Arkansas, whatever school you want to use in the Southeastern Conference region. Now I hear all the time, and I bet you do as well, for Hillsdale applications, people in New York, L.A., Chicago, who would have said in the past, I would never send my son or daughter to the University of Alabama or the University of Mississippi, bragging about their kids going to SEC schools because what you just referenced, these protests, they didn't stand for them in the South. They didn't stand for attacking Jewish people in the wake of October 7th. What does it say about the cultural shift in our landscape that big state schools in the South are suddenly desirable across the country, and small schools like yours in Michigan that are independent and classically committed to education are surging in popularity, while places like Harvard, Yale, UCLA, Stanford, that maybe in the past have been the absolute paragons of academic achievement, seem to be declining? What does that tell us?
Isn't that something? And, that has to do with the politics of those states. Hillsdale's a special case because we don't take any money from the government, and we're old and committed to certain things that we've been committed to for 182 years. But those, in a state like Tennessee or Arkansas, I'm from Arkansas, the government and several state legislatures, including in Tennessee, have set up centers in those places where friends of mine are teaching now, and they, make sure they're sane. But the general climate of those places is not so the most elite places in America, and that it's not just in higher ed, it's the Ivy League, but it's journalism, it's the government, it's big corporations. They look at the world as sort of an engineering project, and we're going to remake the world. And so they don't, they've got very unusual views about the family and sex, and it turns out that what's going on in America is that's not working with lots of people. Like, why? I think people ought to get married and have kids because it makes your life richer and it's cool and it's hard. But if you do that, what do you think about the kids? What do you want them to become? They are produced by a relationship and a sacrifice that parents make for decades. And so they don't want their kids' sex changed without their permission. They don't want their kids taught that that human nature is just a convention and we can re-engineer it. And so there's a rebellion.
Dr. Arnn, can I just jump in really quickly to ask, because this is what I was going to take you anyway. You're talking about the kids and what they're being taught. I'm sure you saw the arguments before the Supreme Court. We were talking about it on the show. What is going on in education where they want to read these very explicit and very trans agenda focused books to very small children? And this is widespread. What is this? Where does this come from?
Well, it's first of all, the intellectual roots of this movement are old, right? That's they became explicit in 19th century German historicism, and they came into America through a movement called progressivism that's still with us today. People use that word still today. But what did they think? What they thought was there isn't a thing like human nature. That word nature is a very interesting word, and it means a lot of things, but it starts with the Latin word for birth, how we come to be and grow, and what we're like when we're grown. But now, no, it's not that so much. Now what we have is the idea that we understand a historical process that is liberating us and changing everything. And because we have modern science, we can get control of the process, and we can re-engineer even ourselves. And so, of course, then the family has to be a target of that, and race is a target of that. And in some versions of it, like the difference between Nazism and communism is only one thing. Nazism is mostly about race. Communism is mostly about property and money. And the Nazism thinks if you've got the right genes, you're a superior being. And communism thinks you are formed by what you do for a living and how you work. And if you got a lot of money, you're in one class, and if you don't, you're in another. And and we have to transcend all that. We have to overcome private property. And what the Nazis think is, if you've got the right blood, then you're superior. Now, what's interesting about both of those doctrines, because they're materialist doctrines, what they do is upset the idea that any human child can come to know things objectively. That's, and human freedom hinges on that argument, which is a classical argument and a religious argument. And all of the colleges, any college of any age, Hillsdale College, Harvard is the oldest one in America, they were all founded on that idea that there's something, a spark in the human being that transcends his body, includes his body, and transcends his body, that makes it possible for him to learn objectively. And see, what's interesting about discarding that argument is that you've discarded all the basis of reasoning. In other words, if the Nazis are right, or the communists, they can't have objective knowledge of anything. See, because they're just creatures of some material condition that drives them. And those doctrines are very prevalent in the world. They have led to 2 great world wars. Tens of millions of people killed over them. So what you should do in a college is study them, understand them, and understand the alternative, which is, we study those things at Hillsdale College, but also we study the classics, right? And then you become armed with a way to understand things that lets you evaluate the world. And see, that's another thing about these Ivy League colleges. I noticed in this last spring, that when they were demonstrating about Hamas and anti-Jews, they would interview these kids, and they didn't really seem to know very much about it. They've just got doctrine, and they want their way right now. But aren't they really there to learn? It's a very interesting question, which, turns out I work for a great historian who wrote about this. Do the Jews, modern Israel, have a right to the land on which it is? Well, first of all, that's a history that goes back, Israel was founded in 1948. How did that happen? Where did that come from? Who decided it, right? In other words, there's a rich world of stuff to figure out about that. And I don't think that's what they're doing at Harvard. Yeah.
I think you're right about that. We have to go to a commercial break. I feel like we could just have you on talking for hours, and it would be phenomenal. We need to have a longer form conversation at some point with you. In the meantime, if your kids are applying to colleges, I would suggest you could do way worse than Hillsdale. Sir, we appreciate the time, and I encourage people to go read that Wall Street Journal piece, which I thought really elucidated some very interesting and intelligent arguments as it pertains to academic freedom. Thank you, Dr. Arnn. It was great to spend time with you in Seattle.
Thank you both.
Look, NFL draft, Buck is fired up. You heard Dana Perino fired up. Dr. Larry Arnn, he's a big sports fan. We had a great conversation in Seattle. If you're fired up and want to have some fun with the NHL, with the NBA, with Major League Baseball underway, heck, I'm sitting right now at a minor league baseball stadium in Knoxville, Tennessee, just off the University of Tennessee's campus. If you are a sports fan, you need to go get signed up right now. PrizePicks.com, code Clay. You get $50 when you sign up, and whatever sport you love, you can play along with. Rush loved sports. I know many of you out there are huge sports fans as well. All you have to do is go to PrizePicks.com, put in the code Clay, and you get $50 when you play $5. You can play in California, you can play in Texas, you can play in Georgia. Do it today. PrizePicks.com, code Clay.